Every time we build and ship software, we learn something new. Understanding what worked and what didn't helps us build more confidently the next time around. That's why we're launching the Confident Commit newsletter. We want to help you make better, data-driven decisions. Subscribe today to Win It Software. CircleCI.com/newsletter.
Hello, and welcome to the Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader for all things CI CD. Today, I'm joined by Birgitta Böckeler, the global lead for AI-assisted software delivery at Thoughtworks. And I'm really excited to get into the first part of that. But when we talk about Thoughtworks, I was saying this before we got going. I think many of the people listening to this will know who Thoughtworks is. But if you don't, first of all, you should definitely check them out. Second, a global provider of consulting services and just general help in being great at software delivery, which is one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this. I mean, I've been reading kind of content and ideas from Thoughtworks for almost as long as I've been doing software, I think, like as long as I've been in this industry, which is a pretty long time. So kind of just a big player in the market, and so excited to be talking to you about about what you do there and about Thoughtworks in general and sort of how the industry is developing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And fun fact, if you don't, for those who don't know, like Thoughtworks actually wrote the first continuous integration server.
I knew that. It's my job to know that. I would imagine a lot of people don't know that, though. So that's
for the audience, for the listeners.
Right,
yeah.
Right. A lot of the ideas and concepts that we build on, to help our customers do what they do, come from Thoughtworks and folks at Thoughtworks, and that's a great thing to point out to kick us off. So tell us what it means to be a global lead for AI-assisted software delivery, and in particular, I think that's changed remarkably in the last 18 months. I mean, 18 months ago, kind of inflection point, but it's been changing super rapidly through that time. So I'd love to hear a little bit about just what you've seen in the market and what you see developing and evolving right now.
Yeah, and I was just thinking this morning that looking at the calendar that I started in this role almost 12 months ago, like about 11 months ago. And it feels shorter and longer at the same time because there's so much happening in the space that it feels very long, but at the same time, it also feels very short. And so Thoughtworks established this role about a year ago to have a person full-time focusing, just looking into this space. Like, how does AI, or of course, we all use this shorthand AI these days, but of course, what we mean is mainly generative AI. How does it affect how we build software, our practices across the board, not only coding, but there's so many knowledge work tasks in software delivery, right? And how can a language model in particular help us with that? So we, as a company, wanted to make sure that we stay on top of this because, as you already kindly mentioned, we've had a bit of influence on practices in software delivery over time. So we want to make sure that we understand what's happening here and really try things in the real world as well, and not just have little party tricked demos, right? But really understand what it means for a team that works with this.
Yeah, I love that, the party trick demo. Like, I think there's been a lot in this space, and part of that is we're so early in trying to imagine what's possible. So it's useful and valuable, I think, to see, like, we can imagine a world where this would happen. We can imagine a world where that would happen. But there's disconnects on both sides, I think, about the time horizon, right? At first, it was like, oh, but that'll take years. And all of a sudden, things were showing up that we didn't think were possible. On the other hand, it's sort of, wait, but that was just a demo. That's not actually possible today. And I think there's some, I'm curious how, when you talk to your clients, when you talk to people in the industry, how big the disconnects are maybe between, the reality, what we're trying to imagine, what's possible today, or even the rate at which we can move.
Yeah, I would say also you were asking about like the last 18 months or, in my case, I was like reflecting on the last 12 months, right? And I would say like the biggest topic in terms of this disconnect in the last 12 months has been this like 50% question, I would like to call it, right? So everybody asked us, but how much does it improve productivity And then people seem to be looking for a percentage answer, right? But of course, like the software delivery team's productivity cannot be measured in just one metric, right? It's very multidimensional. So, and then there were all of these studies that came out, some of them from GitHub, some of them from other people that mentioned these different numbers. And one of them was 55% in one of the GitHub studies. And I think a lot of people took it out of context, probably in particular, people maybe a bit further removed from software delivery, and like, business roles, and thought, oh, okay, 50%. I heard this number. Does that mean I can now cut all of my teams in half? Or maybe can I do that in 2 years and 3 years, right? And I think one thing was like, is taking this number out of context, because it was in the context of how much faster can you potentially complete a task, right? Which does not mean that the whole team gets 55% faster, right? Because coding is maybe, if we're lucky on a team, like 40% of what we do. I think it's more common that it's maybe 30% of what we do. So it's only like a smaller part of what we do. And then also, it's not useful all the time. Coding assistants are more useful for certain tech stacks than for others, for certain tasks than for others. So if you really look at, let's say 40% of the time, you code 40% of the time, let's say in a good scenario, 60% of the time, the coding assistant is useful, which is also high, I would say. And then whenever you use it, you're 55% faster, then maybe you can be around 10% faster, if there's like some way to measure that, right? And then we also know that speed is not everything. There's like so many factors involved in this, right? So, but that was like one of the big disconnects, I would say, this kind of like everybody anchored on this 50% and then hearing something like 10% and thinking it's really bad. But, coding assistants don't cost you that much actually, in comparison to what your developers cost you. So I would say that's one of the biggest ones of the last 12 months.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think, I think I looked at it the other way. Like we use Cody from SourceGraph. And similarly, when we think about the improvement and the cost, a couple percent of increased velocity or just reduced toil, like it is often the simpler tasks, as you said. And a lot of that is like, I know exactly what I need. I just need to do the typing. So I could skip some of that, that's helpful. And that small percentage in any size of engineering organization is pretty significant, right? But this, 50%, the other thing that's, 50% is just ridiculous is what I would say. But the other thing that's interesting about that is the perspective of, therefore can I cut my team in half? I mean, who doesn't have more things to do, like from an engineering perspective, right? It's like, what if we could get more things of value into the hands of our customers more quickly? That would be valuable also. And so I don't need to like make this purchase and, start removing people from the organization, but rather I can try it out, see where it's helpful in my organization. And I, to be clear for anyone listening, we're pretty focused on code generation at this point, but there are plenty of other things which I'd love to hear about. Plenty of other areas where GenAI can help in tasks, right? In parts of the engineering job that are not just code generation. But I do think engineering teams at any scale are expensive. I think we've learned over the last X number of years that getting really high quality people who are really capable is generally a better cost model than turning it into sort of a factory.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Definitely.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that's a ThoughtWorks opinion that you would agree with. So,
yes.
And so, giving those people the boost to do less of the stuff that's kind of simple and more of the hard stuff, the thinking about design and big picture and understanding, are we building the right thing for the customer? That's a boost. But to think it's going to be, half your team or whatever.
Yeah. And also like another way to look at it, like the chief digital officer of one of our clients was asking me the other day, okay, if there's a promise of 30%, whatever, right? Like from his perspective as a business executive, 30% for him means, does that mean that in 2 or 3 years, instead of 500 people, I'm going to need 350 people? Did I do the math right there? I'm not quite sure, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when you look at it like that, then 30% seems like a lot, right? Because it's just hard to imagine like reducing workforce with everything that we have to do these days when we do engineering and operations and all of those things. From 500 to 350 is like a big jump, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, going to that, like, what are the easy things, the hard things? The another big topic I'm finding amongst engineering leaders at the moment is developer experience and sort of like toil and overhead and all these things. And if you said, if we're lucky, we're spending 40%, more like 30% of our time actually writing code. Great. That means there's a 70% window. And when you look at opportunity, right, if you can impact that, you're probably going to do a lot more than, the coding assistant can offer you, right? Like if you feel like it's taking your team a lot to get something done, you should probably ask some questions about what roadblocks you've put in their way to make that hard. And it's often not the time they spend in their editor typing code, right? But it's kind of other places in the delivery process. Do they have clear requirements? Do they understand the customer? I mean, there's just so many other things to address.
There's some of those things. I think there's a lot of potential to use language models to help us get better at that, like clearer requirements or more comprehensive requirements, or But then I think there's also a risk because, language models seem still, after all this time in the, more public conscience, still seem so magical to us, right? So we often overestimate what they can do, right? And it's like there's also this danger of using it as a Band-Aid on something that, actually you should maybe properly improve, right? So, for example, you might be interested to hear that a lot of customers ask us, oh, can this fix my CI/CD? Right. And then when you look at the setup that they have, there's like a lot of problems there that you cannot just solve somehow with a large language model, right? That you actually have a lot of like root causes or contributing factors that you actually have to fix in the automation, right? And then it can actually be dangerous because you might just be delaying the problem and, reducing the pain temporarily by using some language model Band-Aid, and then just delaying, the thing that you should actually be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that there are no silver bullets and that, understanding your problem and what tools are going to solve your problem, I think, as engineering leaders, for certain, we're never going to escape that. And we should be happy that we're never going to escape that, because otherwise it would be not good for us in our roles, right? It's understanding what are the big problems, what are the priorities for your organization, and how can I apply these? How can I apply these tools? So, there's been a lot of change in the last 18 months, 12 months, as we've discussed, a lot of like sort of focused on code generation at the moment. But across the stack, like one of the things that a lot of our customers are doing is implementing, right? Taking advantage of LLMs to implement capabilities in their products. And I'm curious, like those capabilities, I feel like they're changing so rapidly that one day you think you've built a unique product and the next day it's a feature of an LLM sort of thing. You adopt a tool that's supposed to help you and the next day they change all of their approach because because everything's changing. And so in a really frothy world like this, do you have any advice for folks on how to think about, being a leader in the market, taking advantage of the capabilities, but not constantly chasing your tail because you've implemented something that now is broken and, a week from now sort of changes?
Yeah, it of course depends, right? But I'm of course mainly looking at it through the lens of using tooling for software delivery, right? For like coding, for writing my user stories, for all of those things, right? And in that space, like at least for like our customers that I'm looking at, or also for us as Thoughtworks, as the consultancy, you always look at like what is the core domain that I want to invest in and actually build things for, and what are just like, let's say, subdomains or like supporting things that are not actually part of my core business model. So I want to like get them from somebody else, right? And for most organizations, unless you're building a product in the space like CircleCI, it's like a supporting function, right? Like you don't want to build your IDE or your IDE plugins. You want to go to JetBrains or companies like that, or you want to get your CI/CD from like CircleCI, right? So and so when I look at that and then kind of saying, okay, you can either go and kind of like wait until all of those tools in your delivery tool chain get AI support, right? Like, I don't know, get like, for example, some pull requests where the AI suggests to you, how do you fix this failed build, right? Or, Atlassian is actually now starting to put in more features around helping you in Jira, like help let AI help you break down a task and stuff like that, right? So I can wait for that, right? But at the same time, the technology is really accessible, right? Which is a blessing and a curse. So there are actually a lot of things that we can try in the meantime while we wait for these products to get better. And large language models are also the Swiss Army knife with which we can do a lot of these like tasks that usually we wouldn't even buy a tool for, right? So we're actually trying to also like build some temporary custom stuff to play around with on teams, just so that we can get more informed about the potential and try some things with real world data and real world teams without waiting for like ideas to mature in the market, because this helps us and also our clients to kind of gradually also get people used to this technology and upskill. You know, we all have to make this mindset shift from actual software that always gives us deterministic answers to this like new world, right? Where it's kind of like, yeah, it's not deterministic, it's not reliable, but it's kind of still useful. And how do we deal with that, right? So it's actually a case where at relatively low cost, you can experiment because it's so accessible, and then get some learnings, and then maybe jump on the things that are popping up in Atlassian or in CircleCI and so on.
Right. Well, I think that framing of it's an experiment, it's a temporary thing that we're trying. So like we're putting the right level of investment into it, right? We know this is designed to be thrown out versus we're making a big investment right now because it's going to keep changing. And then, you know, the knowledge that you take away would be one thing, and maybe some abstractions over the parts that are changing or something like, okay, this is useful regardless of kind of how these other pieces fit in.
And where's the big potential for my organization, for the things that we do frequently, for the things that are painful for us, right? And the nice thing is actually that this is not like a lot of the other tools and technologies we use in software, where it actually lands in our runtime or it lands in our running delivery tool chain, where once we stop using something, we have to do a big migration project to get off of it, right? But these are tools that don't really create artifacts that are in our runtime. We can just stop using them and move to something else, right? And we can even like do something with some prompting that we share in the organization. And at some point when better tools come along, we can try and move those prompts to another place, right? So there might be some like a little bit migration effort involved, you know, because prompts don't work the same for all models, sure, but it's much different from like moving from one CI/CD tool to another, right?
Right. Yeah. And sort of like knowing which parts are useful across those. And again, the learning, like the knowledge, if you're coming from zero, waiting until the tools are stable to even start learning is probably not an advisable approach. There's so much. I mean, that's the great thing about LLMs, about these chat interfaces, is you can experiment so cheaply without building anything. Right. You don't have to literally don't have to build any, to just start typing questions and prompts and see what kind of responses you get, thinking about how could this be useful in my product? How could this be useful in building things? Can I just ask it without any plugins or purchases or whatever to generate some code for me and see what happens? And then go try some different products from folks and see where that fits into the overall delivery.
Yeah. And the other difference between like doing this with like software delivery as opposed to like putting AI in your product is that I was talking about how it's a blessing and a curse that it's so accessible, right? Like I was just the other day and talking to somebody at one of our clients about kind of like how developers just use this for all kinds of stuff. You know, they prompt it and then they're like, look, I have this thing, but then there are so many things that still need to be done to actually productionize it in a product, right? Like, thinking about cost, thinking about maybe even how do you host it? How do you create a data pipeline for your retrieval augmented generation? How do you filter prompts by customers that you don't want? How do you filter things from the LLM that might be damaging to my brand? All of those types of things, right? But when we do this experimentation for software delivery, it's internal, right? So we don't have to take quite as much effort in this experimentation phase to actually like make it a little bit more bulletproof. And so that's another way how it's like a bit easier and a bit less costly to experiment in that space.
Yeah. I think that's a great call out. I mean, the risk that we've seen, you know, there's been lots of highly publicized cases of people putting, you know, bots directly with their brand in the hands of their customers or whatever, and not loving the outcomes. You know, in this case, it's I'm getting some assistance to then do something else, right? So it's much more comfortable to experiment. So I keep saying 18 months. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but we're like about 18 months into this massive change in how we think about so many different things. I don't think anyone could have predicted, that this would have started, let alone that we'd be here. If you look out another 18 months, 24 months, is there something that that you see coming that you're really excited about, or something that you think people should be thinking about now because there's some potential that maybe they haven't considered?
I mean, yeah, maybe we can talk a bit about that space of like knowledge tasks, right? Like user stories, thinking through architecture, design decisions, documentation, all of those types of things, right? So one thing that we saw pretty quickly when we started doing some of this on real teams is the challenge that knowledge orchestration has, right? So that different from the demos, right? You don't just like snip your finger and then magically the large language model has all of the knowledge and answers people's questions perfectly. And when they work on a user story, it will automatically pull in all the relevant information, all of that, right? So as Atlassian is now, building the first features and where you can actually pull in things from Confluence and Jira, where a lot of organizations have a lot of their knowledge, right? We'll soon be able to try that, right? Like, can we just open the fire hose and then, it will all fall into place? And like, my suspicion is that there's a lot still like to be thought about in like knowledge curation, right? Like, there's so much like, incorrect or like outdated documentation in our wikis, right? Or, so like, how can we actually like narrow this down a little bit to not overwhelm the model as well, right? And just like throwing even more things and even more bigger context windows, I think will not really help us with this knowledge work. There still needs to be a certain level of specificity and correctness, even though we can now be more fuzzy in the language and we can, we can have spelling errors and stuff like that, right? So we can have fuzziness there, but the actual content still needs to be kind of at a certain level, so it's not more distracting to the user than useful, right? So I'm excited to see what will happen there, and also how we can kind of figure out the user experience for the human in the loop, right? So so there are all of these like, it's all the rage right now, like new tools that try to help the developer make a plan, right? Break down a task into smaller tasks, or as a product manager, when you have like an epic and you're breaking it down into smaller user stories. So that's like, I see a lot of those things right now. And I always think about like what is the user experience like for the product manager or the developer when they get the suggestion? How well can I review it? We already have review fatigue in coding assistants. Now, how can I review this plan that I get? And how easy is it for me to edit it and iterate on it and check if it's correct, right? In code, we often have quick feedback loops from the compiler or from a test if the generated code suggestion actually helps us. But how does that feedback loop work when we're breaking down a task, right? So how do we create the best experience of the AI and the user to work on that? So I'm looking forward to some good ideas out there. We're trying a few things, but I haven't seen that much out there yet. So that's one area I'm interested in. And the other one, as I already just said, in the coding assistance world, like there are now all of these attempts to make the scope of the problem that we're solving bigger, right? That the AI is solving, right? So far in the coding assistant, it's a lot about like a few lines of code, it's kind of like accompanying us as we're thinking as the developer, we're in charge, right? But now, after Devin a few months ago, now there's GitHub Copilot Workspace. As I just said, like Jira is getting some functionality like that. Then I saw something in Amazon's coding assistant, just to like give some examples, right? They're all trying to help with this like plan a task and then actually also help you implement a larger piece, right? And it looks interesting. Like in most of the demos, you can immediately poke holes and like think about, but does it really work for this or for that? But there might be like a category of tasks where we can get like some uplift maybe in the next, what did you say, 1.5 years?
Yeah. I mean,
but I'm always like skeptical. I don't know, like I'm coming more from a skeptical side, but I'm happy to be convinced otherwise in the next 18 months.
I heard someone describe, one of the big sort of not really opportunities, but the values that they're getting at the moment as being breaking writer's block, like less writing the thing for me, but more giving me some fresh ideas to get started. So I was listening to you talk about, defining tickets, stories, whatever, right? Just saying, cool, what are all the things I need to cover when I put this together? Like, I don't need you to tell me what the availability requirement is for this capability, but I need to remember that that's a thing that needs to be included.
Exactly,
right? Yeah. So like maybe there's some templates or whatever, but maybe my templates aren't that good. Yeah. And then I, as I think about the kind of the window getting larger and your point there of tightening it up to the stuff that's good. I mean, I can't help but think about the overall training corpus, I guess, for these models, right? Like, who's putting all of their code out there publicly? Like, yes, there are some big, well-known open source projects that are really well managed, and there's a whole bunch of pet projects. I wrote this on the weekend. I didn't care about it. I barely just started writing software, and we're using all of that, right? So at some point, I do think we're going to have to tighten the quality, whether we're talking about, whether we're talking about code, whether we're talking about generating stories, if it's the outdated documentation to the like half-baked implementation, all that stuff is given equal weighting, I think. I mean, I don't build LLMs, but I don't think people are combing through it saying this is good and this is bad. And so we're going to have to really focus on quality.
And I mean, there's to a certain extent that's happening in coding assistants, right? Like, they don't fully only rely on the large language model. They're getting better and better in the tooling, in like adding more context to what is being sent to the language model in terms of like picking out which parts of the code are actually relevant here, or like, you can ask them questions like, where am I implementing feature XYZ, right? And there's like different things that people are trying to make this better, right? This part of the retrieval augmented generation. So it's all about this, what I was saying before, knowledge orchestration or context orchestration, right? Like, how can we make that better? And there's a lot more potential there right now than in just making the model better, I think. And then to the other thing you were saying about like helping me like think about the things that I've forgotten. And that's also where I see like a huge potential in this area of the knowledge task, like story writing, right? So in the sandbox that we built for ourselves that we're using with some of our clients, which we just put on GitHub, by the way. So maybe we can put that in the show notes. I would be interested in getting some people's feedback on it. But in that sandbox, like we have one feature that we're trying where the AI pretends to be a developer that is critiquing my story or asking me questions about my story, right? Like, is there a limit on the length of this field? Or how does the user choose this customer, like with the name or like, so all of these things that as soon as I go into like an estimation session or like planning session or whatever people are doing and show developers like what they wrote, right? They immediately often ask questions where I'm like, oh yeah, I should have thought of that, right? So, and then the AI makes suggestions, what could be the answers. I can overwrite them, hit a button, and then I get my draft of the user story, right? Or you can apply that to so many things. Like one of the things I always demo is about threat modeling, right? Like give me scenarios specifically for my data flow where the different categories of, threats are relevant, right? Like where can people tamper with input? Where can they elevate their own privilege? Stuff like that, right? So especially if I'm not as familiar with threat modeling, this can be like a huge help if somebody in the organization has written a good prompt to help me walk through that for my application, right? So all of this, like give me scenarios for testing, give me more exceptional scenarios for the user story acceptance criteria. All of those things, I think there's a huge potential.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to the next 18 months. Maybe we can get back together and we'll grade your predictions. I'm just kidding. But like so much is changing so fast that it's an exciting time to kind of like roll with it, learn from it. And then like it's a constant source of creativity as well, right? Just seeing what people are building and how they're approaching it. Awesome. Well, unsurprisingly, I learned a ton. Thank you so much for joining me. Thanks everyone who's listening. If you enjoy this, if you want us to talk about someone or talk with someone in particular, probably not talk about someone. I guess we could do that too. That would be awkward. If you want us to talk about a specific topic, find us on Twitter at CircleCI. Is it still Twitter? X, whatever. I don't know. Find me on LinkedIn. That's probably more useful. And if you enjoy the podcast, sign up and subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. Birgitta, thanks again. It's been awesome. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
If you like what you heard today and want to learn more about building, testing, and delivering AI-enabled software, we've gathered all our best resources and tutorials into one place, Go to circleci.com/AI-ML to explore and start learning.